You wake before the sun, though time has long stopped mattering. The dust on your fingertips is older than memory, older than language, older than the question. The stone waits, as it always has, exactly where you left it. It does not ask, it does not care, but still, it waits. There is a moment, just one, when you stand at the base of the slope and you wonder not whether it will fall, but whether you will. That flicker is not fear, it is clarity. The mountain is unchanged, the stone is unchanged, but something in you has begun to rot into freedom. They said you were punished, cursed, condemned. They said the gods had the final word, but what if they mistook your silence for surrender? What if the joke was never on you? Somewhere between the push and the fall, between repetition and revolt, there's a smirk blooming beneath your breath, not of hope, but of knowing. You roll the stone not because you must, but because there is nothing else left worth mocking. And in that moment, the cosmos blinks and turns away. You return to the slope not because you are called, but because there is no longer a need for calling. The ritual has dissolved into your bones, silent and obedient, like breath, like gravity. The stone is there, waiting without anticipation, exactly where you left it yesterday, and the 1,000 yesterdays before. It does not move on its own, but it remembers. It remembers the weight of your fingers, the heat of your palms, the skin torn and regrown so many times that even pain has stopped keeping count. The stone does not love you, the mountain does not welcome you, and yet you return. That is the absurd. That is the contract. You once asked why, a long time ago. The question echoed, not outward, but inward, bouncing through the narrow corridors of your mind, like a desperate animal searching for a way out. Why this stone? Why this hill? Why this repetition? But the question did not survive the climb. You murdered it with every push, crushed it beneath the weight of each collapse. You do not ask anymore, not because you understand, but because you have outlived the need to. There's a power in that. Isn't there a terrible, brilliant power in doing what has no justification? The priest asks for meaning. The scholar draws conclusions. The poet pleads for beauty, but you no longer demand answers. You roll, not in pursuit of a goal, not in defiance of fate, but because the motion itself is the final rebellion. That is what they will never understand. They, who still write prayers in the dirt and wait for something to answer back. You have heard the silence long enough, loud enough to know it speaks in a language of mockery, not mercy. Somewhere in the crevice of that slope, time folds. You do not age here, or rather, you age infinitely, a wrinkle for every push, a scar for every descent. The body may betray you, but the absurd does not. It is loyal, ruthless, yes, but loyal. It promises nothing and keeps that promise with a purity no god could imitate. Each morning is the same, each climb identical, and yet here is the paradox: each failure feels singular, a unique collapse, a fresh futility. The stone slipping from your grip as though it, too, has decided to play, as though the cosmos, seeing you approach the summit, nudges it back with a grin. Do you feel it? Then that grin, that invisible laughter behind the wind. It is not cruel, only indifferent, but indifference, when stretched across the infinite, becomes the most precise cruelty. There was a time when you imagined yourself watched, judged, measured. You felt the gaze of Olympus like heat behind your spine. But now the gods have grown bored, or maybe you have become one of them, just quieter, one who bleeds, who sweats, who climbs not to reign, but to endure. And what is endurance if not the final gesture of contempt? They say the myth is a punishment, that you were arrogant, disobedient, ungrateful, that this cycle is justice, divine and irreversible. But what they fail to see is the shift subtle, internal, irreversible, when you stopped climbing to appease them and began climbing to mock them. When you turned the ritual into your own stage, your own performance, your own absurd theater, where the applause is silence and the audience has long since vanished. They condemned you to repetition, thinking it would break you, but they didn't understand the repetition is your escape. They cannot invent a new hell for a man who finds rhythm in it. The stone, too, is changing. Not in form, no. It is still rough, still unyielding, but its memory grows. It knows your patterns, the way you shift your weight, the way your muscles strain, the way your breath catches at the same crooked bend. It resists you, yes, but no longer surprises you. It has become your partner, not a friend, don't be foolish, but a mirror. You push, and it reflects. You fall, and it waits. It is the absurd made solid. You could give it a name, but what would be the point? It would not answer. It never has. And that silence, that eternal refusal, is the only honesty left in this world. Do you remember the first time you laughed? Not from joy, not from relief, but from sheer absurdity. The laugh that burst from your lungs as the stone slipped from the summit once again, bouncing back to the bottom with the enthusiasm of a child who doesn't yet know death. That laugh was not madness. It was awakening. It was the moment you stopped expecting the universe to kneel. The moment you realized that the joke was cosmic. Yes, but that you could be in on it. That you could be the punchline and still smirk. And oh, how they hate that smirk. The gods, the philosophers, the worshippers of order, they tremble before that smirk because it is immune. Immune to doctrine, to salvation, to despair. It is the expression of a man who knows the script and still chooses to perform it without applause, who rolls the stone not because he believes, but because he refuses to stop, not out of hope, but from defiance. Not because there is meaning, but because the lack of meaning demands movement. They will call it madness. Let them. Madness is only a name for the clarity they cannot endure. There is a moment, each day, when the sun stabs the sky just right, and your shadow becomes enormous, stretched across the slope like a monument. For a second, you look like a god, but you don't dwell there. You don't bow to illusion. The shadow passes. The sun moves on. The climb continues. And when the stone slips again, as it always does, you do not curse. You do not scream. You walk quietly, step by step, down the same hill, back to the beginning, where the absurd waits with open arms and a familiar smile, where the stone sits like a loyal enemy. And you, Sisyphus, remember your place, not in heaven, not in hell, but here, in the middle of nowhere, where the joke is yours. You have walked this slope enough to know the weight does not change. Only your silence does. At first it was trembling, then whispering, then nothing at all. You no longer curse when it falls, no longer beg for mercy, no longer hope that one day the stone will stay where you leave it. Hope is the cruelest superstition. It makes beggars of kings and martyrs of fools. You shed that illusion long ago, somewhere between your 100th ascent and your 1,000th collapse. When the wind itself grew tired of watching, there is no redemption at the peak, no reward for persistence, no hand reaching down from the clouds to lift your burden. There's only the same incline, the same friction, the same deaf cosmos, and the same dead gods. And in that repetition, you have found something more durable than faith laughter. Not the laughter of joy, you have outgrown joy, but the deeper kind, the bitter, bottomless kind that comes when you realize the universe is wearing a mask and it's your own face. The mountain never lied to you. The gods did. They promised justice. They promised punishment. They pretended this task was exile, but they underestimated the human capacity to turn torment into art. Every time the stone slips, you smirk. Not because you enjoy the failure, but because the failure has become yours. They gave you this prison, and you carved your name into every wall. They cursed you with futility, and you made it ritual. They expected screams, and you answered with silence so complete, it echoed. This is your kingdom now, not because you rule it, but because you refuse to kneel. You will never kneel, and that is why they cannot touch you anymore. Somewhere along the endless climb, you stopped being the punished and became the witness. You no longer believe in sin, in virtue, in final meanings. You believe in the slope, in the weight, in the absurd curve of motion that never justifies itself. And still, you move. You, who have no illusions left to lose. You, who smile not because it makes sense, but because everything else is worse. Your smile is the only sacred thing left on this hill. It is uninvited, unprovoked, unwanted, and that is why it endures. They cannot control a man who laughs where he should weep. They cannot defeat a man who sees no enemy. Your hands bleed, your back aches, your lungs burn, but the gods grow weaker with every step you take. They die in the face of your repetition, because eternity does not belong to them anymore. It belongs to you. Not the kind of eternity that promises heaven, but the kind that offers no exit and still you keep climbing. Not for meaning, not for victory, for rhythm, for defiance, for the absurd pleasure of choosing motion in a motionless world. When others pray for an answer, you roll the stone. When others invent purpose, you roll the stone. When others collapse from the weight of their own illusions, you roll the stone. And each time it slips, you descend not as a victim, but as a performer returning to the stage. The audience is gone. The theater is crumbling, but the play continues, because you have become the playwright and the fool, and the applause in the silence. You are not saved. You are not damned. You are not even remembered, but you are free in the only way that matters, free from needing it to be otherwise. And what is freedom, if not the refusal to ask for escape? They call you tragic, but you have never wept. They call you cursed, but you have never begged. You bear the stone the way a man wears his own skin, not because it is beautiful, but because it is his. There is no pride in this, no triumph. Just this you see clearly, you see without flinching. You wake up each day and lift the absurd into your arms, not to prove something, not to reach somewhere, but because it is yours. The climb does not need an ending. The stone does not need to stay. The joke is not on you. The joke is you. And in that, you have become untouchable. The world offers no consolations, so you do not ask. The gods offer no answers, so you do not speak. You simply place your hands against the stone and push. That is your final word. That is your revolt. Not in shouting, but in repeating. Not in changing the task, but in changing your gaze. They wanted you to break, but you became a mirror. They wanted you to despair, but you disappeared into clarity. And now, as the slope rises again, and the stone leans into your shoulders, and your body folds under its ancient weight, you grin. Because you know something they never will, that when nothing matters, everything becomes yours, not in meaning, in motion, in the refusal to be still, in the strength to keep pushing even when the peak disappears again into cloud. You will never reach it, and you do not need to. Let them have their heavens. Let them have their endings. You will stay here with the wind, the rock, the climb, and your impossible, uninvited, unforgivable smile. You no longer see the summit as a place. It has become an illusion you've learned to walk through, a flicker of light that fades just before your hand touches it. The mountain is not an object. It is a condition. It does not rise from the earth, it rises from within you. Each slope is the same slope. Each collapse is the same betrayal, but it no longer surprises you. The absence of reward has become its own kind of rhythm. You push the stone not toward a goal, but through a ritual that keeps the void at bay. The stone rolls, and so you do not disappear. That is the contract now. You and the absurd, not lovers, not enemies, just two silhouettes passing through one another in silence, each pretending the other does not exist, yet neither able to stop the dance. Some days the wind howls with more teeth. Some days the sky looks like it might answer, but it never does, and you have stopped waiting. You move without music, you rise without prayer, you labor not because the world is worth it, but because even a meaningless motion becomes sacred when it is chosen. You were never given the freedom to stop, but you were given the freedom to see, to look at the endlessness and name it for what it is, not suffering, not punishment, but absence. You walk into that absence each morning like a man greeting his own ghost, not afraid, not grateful, just awake. You touch the stone and it responds, not with sound, but with weight. Always weight. It speaks in gravity, and so do you. Not in language, not in dreams, in contact, in pressure, in the defiance of falling only to rise again. The gods are no longer watching. Maybe they never were. Maybe the myth was always wrong. Maybe no one assigned you this fate, and no one cares whether you fulfill it. Maybe that is the point, that no one is coming, that no one needs to. That meaning is not lost, it was never there. You call this freedom not because it feels good, but because it cannot be taken from you. The mountain can stretch itself forever. The stone can grow heavier with time, but the choice remains yours to lift it anyway. The laughter comes less often now, but deeper. It's no longer a burst, it's a tremor that runs through your bones as you walk the same path again, knowing full well where it leads, knowing full well it changes nothing, and choosing it anyway. That is where the smile lives now, not on your lips, but under your skin, like a second heartbeat. You do not perform for anyone. You are not a hero. You are not a metaphor. You are not here to inspire or to be remembered. You are here because you are here. The mountain is the only stage that cannot be burned. The stone, the only partner who never leaves. The task, the only mirror that does not lie. And in that brutal clarity, you become untouchable. They speak of salvation as if it were a door you could open. But salvation from what? From the earth. From time, from futility. There is nothing behind the curtain. No secret, no design. You have pulled it back yourself. You have seen the machinery rusted, hollow, blind, and still you climb. That is your protest. That is your comedy. That is your unkillable scream beneath the silence. They will call you meaningless. Let them. They think meaning is a crown to be worn, a path to be followed, a light to be chased. You know better. You know it is a game played by those too frightened to stop. And you have stopped. Not the movement, the illusion, the pretending. You see the absurd, and you do not flinch. That is where all freedom begins. Not in choice, but in confrontation. You have confronted the joke and chosen to play it anyway. They still kneel before their dreams. You sharpen your hands against the stone. They wait for paradise. You carry the mountain. They write hymns. You sweat and bleed, and do not look away. That is why the absurd belongs to you now. It cannot break you because you no longer ask it to be otherwise. It cannot punish you because you no longer need it to reward you. You are the heretic of every system that promised you peace. You are the ghost of rebellion, not in fire, but in persistence, not in noise, but in motion. Each repetition is your refusal, each descent, your signature, each climb, your affirmation of nothingness. They cannot follow you here. Their myths will not survive this altitude. Their gods have no oxygen on this slope. Only you remain, you and the rock and the rising. The world spins on lies, but you have found something more stable: futility. It never changes. It never betrays. You wake into it each morning and lay down in it each night. And if that sounds bleak, it is only because they have not yet dared to live without answers. You have. That is your crime and your grace. That is what makes the mountain yours, not theirs. That is what makes this endless climb your only truth. When the stone rolls down again, and you will follow. Not in despair, not in victory, but in that third place no one ever talks about: lucidity. To see clearly, to move anyway. That is the only salvation left to a thinking being in a silent world. And it is enough. More than enough. Because it is real. Because it is yours. Because it does not ask you to kneel. The mountain never ends. And that, finally, is freedom. There's a moment, always, at the bottom when you stand still, and the stone is still, and for the briefest instant, neither of you belongs to time. The sky is pale and empty, and no wind moves. The silence becomes thick enough to breathe. You do not move. Not yet. You do not think. You simply are. The mountain towers above you, patient as death. The stone rests beside you, warm with memory. And in that pause before the next ascent, before the next absurd ballet, you feel it again, not meaning, but presence. The gods have gone. The myths have rotted. But your shadow remains, long and stubborn, carved into the dust of the slope. The joke never ends. That is the point. That is the price. That is the gift. You take a breath, not because you must, but because there is no one left to tell you not to.